So I'm not sure why this memory kept coming up today, so I thought I'd talk about it. I think I may have talked about it before, but it's something that happened when, I don't know, I was maybe 7 or 8 years old, so a few decades ago. And it was memorable enough that it's still very clear in my mind. And it was, just one of the kids that I was hanging out with in the neighborhood said, hey, I've got a riddle. You want to hear a riddle? And I said, sure. And so he told me this riddle. And the riddle was profound in a number of respects, and totally new to me at that age. And coincidentally, the next day or a day or two later in school, the teacher said, well, we've got 15 minutes at the end of the class. Does anybody know any riddles? So a few people told, usual punchy kinds of riddles. And then, the last 5 minutes, I said, well, I have a riddle. And I told this riddle. And, the class ended and everybody was, just bummed out, And even the teacher was like, oh, well, that's a waste of time, But so anyway, with that preamble, I'll tell you what the riddle was. The riddle was, where was the man when he jumped off the bridge? And, so, what I did when I first heard that was, well, he was sort of in the air headed towards the river, And it was, nope, that was after he jumped off the bridge. And then I said, okay, well, maybe he was still, his toes were still touching the bridge, but he was leaning over. And it was like, nope, that was before he jumped off the bridge, right? And so it was like, okay, one molecule of his sneaker was still touching, nope, that was before. So what I found profound about this as a 7-year-old was that a couple of things. One, that there was such a thing as questions without answers. Because there was the reality. Clearly, someone jumps off the bridge. At some point, he's on the bridge, and at some point, he's off the bridge. But then the question is when, right? So, we come up against the limitation of words, like conceptual words imposed on the reality of something, never quite cut it. So that was the first thing that sort of struck me as a 7-year-old. The other thing was that there was this sort of infinitesimally small moment of now, right? And so, when we imagine the way we tend to imagine time, the way our language is structured is that, there's the future sort of headed our way, and then it passes through this present moment, and then everything is, piled up in the rear view mirror that we can mostly remember, right? That's our image of how time works. But the reality of it is that it always happens and only ever happens in the present moment, right? We may be thinking about what's happening in the future. We may be remembering what happened in the past, but all of that always unavoidably happens in the present moment. But the odd thing about it is that you can't say much about the present moment, right? It's too quick. So any thought about it is already a conceptualization about some moment that's already passed, or some anticipation of a moment that is not yet arrived. So we spend a lot of our lives, sort of looking in the rear view mirror, trying to justify or fondly remember or regret or wish it happened again, or, trying to gain some pleasure out of, what's already been experienced, right? Daydreaming, okay? Or we can spend a lot of energy worrying about how things might turn out or should turn out, or how I really, really want them to turn out, or, oh my gosh, I hope they don't turn out like that. And so this has a lot to do with just the degree to which we trust life, right? Like, I don't, it's like, not quite sure I want to trust what is in store, so I'm going to try to manage the heck out of it and to get it to turn out the way I'd like it to. Anybody spend any effort doing that? Right? So, and in the meantime, our entire life is lived in this instantaneous, always present now, right? That's how our life is actually lived. But where we have learned to spend a great deal of our attention is in mental conceptualizations about what's already happened or what may happen in the future, right? It's sort of like what John Lennon said about, life is what happens when you're making other plans, right? So I found those two things quite profound, even as a 7-year-old, that there were certain questions that didn't have an answer, and then there was this really odd experience of something happening in this moment that will never be repeated exactly. Totally unique moment. Every moment's like a fresh expression. And yet we tend to ignore that. Right? We do. It's just what we've been taught, right? The reality of it, for all the effort that spiritual people make to try to stay in the present moment, right? Nobody's actually ever managed to get out of the present moment. That's the reality of it. They may think about something in the future or the past, but the only time you can do that is in the present moment. So it comes back. It says a lot about how we choose to live our life, whether we're actually present for what's actually happening in this and every moment, or whether we're subjecting our experience to like a mental overlay, where we're trying to manage our experience by anticipating the future or explaining or regretting the past. And that's how we live our life, right? Live our life sort of going over what may have happened 20 years ago, or worrying about what may happen next week. So it's helpful just to see that pattern, just to see it as something, okay, that's how these organisms were trained in a sense. I mean, that's what what all our schooling was about, wasn't it? Worry about your future, get a good resume, get the right situation, right family, the right house, the right job, the right. And in the meantime, what's actually happening is in this moment, which is always fresh, always new, but we tend to miss it because we're so busy inhabiting our mental framework of how life will be or has been, right? So what would it look like if we didn't, if we were just available for this moment? In some sense, we don't quite trust ourselves, right? Or we don't quite trust life. It's almost like life can be seen as a bit of an adversary. Like I'm here, me separate over here, and life's big and uncertain, and lots of things can happen, and I'm not so sure that life is trustworthy, right? My experience is when we view life that way, life shows up that way. If we tend to view life as providing the experiences that we need for our deeper realization, it may not always be fun, right? I think for most people, if you look back on one's life, that the things that were most transformative were also the most difficult. Yes? Right? It's not like I'd want to do that again. No. But it's like I can't regret it either. It's like had that not happened, I wouldn't have the deeper understanding that I have today. So, whether that's actually ultimately precisely true, I couldn't say. But I can say that if we have that, I like to call it a useful construct, right? Believing that life is not opposed, seeing life as beneficent, in terms of providing experiences that may be challenging, but ultimately helpful, right? Because I've always found it odd that we tend to resist those experiences that in retrospect have been most transformative, right? No, I don't want that. That's not what I want. Okay, I guess that's what's happening. And then 10 years later, it's like, yeah, I got to admit that was essential. Right? So if we see that happening on a larger scale, let's say, then maybe we can just be a little bit more receptive day to day in terms of what's actually showing up in our life. Doesn't mean we have to like it, right? Doesn't mean we have to love it, right? But what we can do is acknowledge that that's what's happening in this moment. That's how life is appearing. Somebody that I don't particularly care for is in my face. Yeah, okay. The weather's not nice today. I wish it were like this. Okay. Get an illness. Okay. But when we begin to see that just being available for life in that sense, however it does show up, it doesn't mean that we have to like it, right? That's really important. But it does mean not denying it or putting a Band-Aid on it or running away from it, right? It's just that's what's happening in this moment. Right? That's what I have to deal with. Okay. Right. Again, it not necessarily fun, but what it does do is liberate us from needing to manage all the circumstances of our life. Right? When we can really relax about, being capable as humans to face what shows up for humans, Sometimes there is sickness, sometimes there is pain, sometimes there is loss, right? Sometimes there is old age. It happens. And the willingness to experience however that does show up is actually the liberation. It's not arranging all our circumstances so that everything is just perfect, right? I mean, I've tried that. I tried that for, I don't know, more years than I'm going to admit here in public, but to try to make all the circumstances just right, and then, therefore, I'd be happy. But besides taking an enormous amount of energy, it's not a stable concept. Because things change, always. Sometimes they change the way we like them to change, sometimes they don't. But what we can do is adjust how we relate to whatever it is that is happening. Again, it's not about liking it or disliking it. It's about acknowledging that in this moment, life is showing up and it looks like this. Okay. Are we on board with that or not? If we're not on board with it, we've got life happening, and then we've got what I want. And who's going to win that one? It's not. So the more just at ease we can become about allowing life to show up as it does, there's a relaxation that comes with that. There's also confidence that comes with that, like confident that whatever arises, I may not like it, but I'm willing to endure it. I'm willing to have that experience. Right? It's not like we're laying out conditions to life like, okay, I'm willing to have these experiences, but I'm not willing to have those experiences. Right? I mean, that's what we normally do. So this is just opening the barn door and say, okay, I'm available. And that's really the freedom. The freedom when we can finally relinquish our demands on life and allow life to be as it is. We still get to live, and we're actually much more present in each moment because we're not imposing any ideas of how it should be on the moment. We're just available. And in some ways trust ourselves to respond to that, right? Not respond out of past patterns or conditioning, but respond with our innate intelligence, right? And to trust that. We may not know how that'll respond in advance. You generally don't, right? But there's a faith, you could say, that when I'm required to respond, there will be something that responds. And that energy comes out of non-opposition to life, right? It comes out of becoming aligned with life rather than trying to manage our own personal identity center as separate from life. I'm going to defend this, I'm going to protect this, I'm going to enhance this, I'm going to improve this, I'm going to, take on all comers, whatever, Otherwise, we're just available, with an intelligence that's available in the moment when we're not coming from preconceived ideas, not coming from conditioned thought. And it may take a while to get to trust that. But the more we can get out of our own way, the more we can recognize that what our essential beingness is, this awareness that we pointed to at the outset, rather than all the facts and history and, life story. That this sense of being present in this moment is our most fundamental sense of existence. Right? Fully operational already. Right? We're not talking about attaining something that you're not. I mean, how would you even do that? If we were all giraffes and we say, okay, all you have to do is become an elephant, how would you go about doing that? So what we're talking about is not becoming something that you're not already. Talking about recognizing what you are already and have always been and couldn't be otherwise. And what that is, it's been called by many things. It can be called essential nature, original mind, empty mind, Buddha nature, Christ consciousness, awareness, consciousness. I don't care what you call it. Just different names for our already essential nature. So what we're talking about here isn't attaining something that we're not. It's recognizing what we are. Maybe sort of covered up with a lot of ideas about, who we think we are, or who we think the other person is, or the world is, but underneath all that, what is available to see is it's just this awareness that's already fully functional. Anybody not aware, like in this moment? Sort of a trick question. You can't actually say, yeah, me, I'm not aware, right? You can't say that, right? You have to be aware enough that even the question was asked to be able to say, no, I'm not aware. And you'd have to be aware to claim that there's unawareness there. So it's sort of unavoidable. So that's the awareness that we're talking about, not a special spiritual awareness, right? Sometimes in Buddhism you'll hear, talk about pure awareness, and you think, ooh, wow, I like that. It sounds like a moral thing, right? I'm going to sort of purify myself to be aware. Once I purify myself, eat right, adopt the right set of beliefs, be able to chant the right things, wear the right clothes. As soon as I do that, but it's actually not what it means at all. All it means is just awareness of itself. Awareness without the attention placed on the objects that arise within awareness. Awareness, just aware of itself. Like in this moment, there's awareness, okay? There may be thoughts happening, there may be feelings, there may be memories, maybe sensations. But there's something present that is aware of all of that already. And that, just that sort of distilled realization is what's called pure awareness. It's just the awareness prior to whatever appears within it. Awareness prior to any arisings of sensations, perceptions, thoughts within that awareness. And the good news is that's already present. We may or may not fully recognize it. We may or may not even value it. It actually doesn't matter in a sense because it is already what's living this life. Every experience you've ever had in your entire life happened within awareness, right? If you weren't aware of it, as far as you were concerned, it didn't happen. So when we begin to look at it in this way, it's not like the awareness that we're talking about is some sort of remote, philosophical, spiritual kind of destination. It's like the entirety of our experience within which everything happens. And that's the real freedom of it, because when it is clearly understood that this awareness is what we are, it's not of the same world. It's not of the same world of form. Right? Everything in the world, by form, I just mean anything that has a shape, a duration, a characteristic, so, it could be a thought, it could be a mountain, it could be a butterfly, it could be a book, it could be anything, right? All of those things have the characteristic of impermanence. Butterfly's life, short. Mountain's life, big. Still, there's a duration, there's a shape, there's a characteristic of existence. Humans have a particular typical lifespan, typical shape more or less, typical aging process. Thoughts have a certain characteristic, they have a certain sort of flavor to them, and they have a certain duration, they don't last forever. They have the ability to catch us or inspire us or depress us or, So everything has these characteristics of form except one thing. So over in this corner we have, 10,000 forms, millions of forms. Right over in this corner we have one thing, and that is this capacity to be aware of all of that. So which is more fundamental? It's not helpful actually to take on a belief or anything, but it's worth pondering. Like, I wonder if that's actually, at the deepest level, I wonder if that's actually what I am. Just this capacity to be aware. At first it feels a little flimsy, right? Like, no, it's got to be more solid than that. I'm not so sure. I want to give up all the effort that I put into sort of polishing up this organism. I'm not so sure I want to sort of walk away from that in favor of something that doesn't feel like it has any weight to it, any texture to it, any other than it's, always present. It's got that going for it. So it's good not to try to take it on as a belief or deny it as an idea. It's just to hold it as an open question, because that's really what has the power, just to hold it as a question. Like, I wonder if that's actually possible. I wonder if that's actually really who I am, is this sort of unique consciousness that we all have. I wonder if that's really what I am. And just don't try to answer the question. That's the secret, right? Because any conceptual answer won't be satisfactory. But if it's just held as a question and just let it sort of marinate for a while, maybe, I don't know, maybe a few years. Like, I wonder if that's actually who I really am. Because that's actually what takes us beyond the mind's insistence on conceptualizing everything. That's actually what dismantles that process. To just allow that mystery to really express itself. Really, see the depth of what we truly are. And yes, sure, we still have the body, we still have a history, we can still get a job, all of that still happens. It's not like we're denying any of that, but it's not what we essentially are.